right? Just like the axioms are themselves inconsistent, they are subtracted, they are outside, they are removed, they are the one thing in set theory that cannot be determined in set theory, right, is the axioms themselves. So even though they are part of mathematical ontology, they are subtracted from the apparatus of set theory itself, such that they lend consistency to the entire apparatus of set theory.
Is it correct to say that they're excrescence?
No,
okay.
That's not correct.
Okay.
Because again, excrescence, singularity, normality only appear within the conditions of set theory.
Okay.
And the ability for them to appear in the conditions of set theory are contingent on the inconsistent, right? Going back to the first part, which are what? The axioms.
Okay.
The axioms neither belong nor are included.
So would you say then that would you say that Badiou takes Plato's point when he criticizes the poets and the artists of merely being able to only do reflections, and that's why you're never able to fully like uncover being?
Kinda. I mean, in an abstract, sort of like really complicated read, I would guess so. But I don't think the reflection is necessarily the key issue here, right? Or that is to say the representation. At least in that section, I mean, you're welcome to interject, but at least I think that section in the Republic is actually dealing with a different issue.
You can pull it out of the sophist maybe, but it's a stretch.
All right.
If I can make one point also on the Heideggerian versus Lacanian distinction, I think it's a really helpful way of doing it, but I want to put a finer point on it so that we don't take Badiou as a Lacanian all the way through.
Right, no, I mean...
because I think you're right to say that, so Heidegger and Lacan are really a pair in the sense that they're trying to think about the relation between, if you will, the ontological difference between being and beings, and the subject, which is Dasein for Heidegger and the subject for Lacan. So they're both trying to think about this connection here. What Badiou is doing is saying Lacan is right that about the way that these two are related. Heidegger's wrong, but Lacan is wrong about how this is connected to this. So that he's not going to have a Lacanian notion of the subject at all in the end. But he does think Lacan is right about the question of being and beings.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to sort of reveal the end of the story, right. The subject is itself a function of fidelity. Just to throw something else out there, just because I'm thinking about subtractive, and I always like to take my dig against Negri and Hart. This is why you should be extraordinarily careful when thinking about what Badiou calls subtractive politics. Right? There's a very coarse, and I'm going to just say it, stupid way of understanding that, which is sort of the Negri way, which is, oh, what it means to have subtractive politics. And actually, I'll be perfectly honest, I think Zizek makes this mistake as well. Especially first as tragedy, then as farce. I think he's making this mistake when he refers to subtractive politics. Or he's referring to someone else who is not Badiou. But this idea that what you do is you withdraw from politics, and so you find this outside of capitalism in which to stage a revolutionary struggle, or which to stage, politics. That's wrong, right? In the very nature of the subtractive, it's the thing that withdraws to lend consistency, in this case to ontology, but in that case to politics. And so I'll refer very briefly to Badiou, literally as Badiou, and then also another example. We've talked about sort of, what's the term? I want to say a scaffold, crutch, right? A crutch way to think about this. And so for all of those who are familiar with Lacan, a crutch way to think about this, of the subtractive politics, is that of the vanishing mediator. But again, that's a crutch. Right? So what you should understand is what's going on here is different from Lacan, but that's sort of the way to begin to conceptualize it, if you need that. In theory of the subject, right, Badiou, following Mao, says the masses are what make history. But the thing is the masses are always objective and indeterminate, such that you have the masses, like today, we have the masses, and they're inactive, they're not engaged in political activity. And then there's a revolution, right? A revolutionary struggle in which the masses cease to be masses as such, but become mobilized individuals and sort of vanish in the actions of the struggle. Concretely, they become the PLA, they become the Red Guards, they become, you know, the Red Army, whatever you want, but they cease to be masses as such. And then either they return or, you know, they vanish entirely into, in the case of a failed not revolutionary insurrection, but the failed revolution against capitalism, they vanish into administration. So, but the important thing is the masses are what are subtracted from the situation, which yield the consistency and the possibility of the revolutionary struggle. Is this making sense to any? Joe, at least?
Yeah.
Okay, because you read it.
I formulated it a little different, but yeah.
Okay. And then,
because I think he changes this slightly after the subject, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and of course, right, the question of subtractive politics is always going to be contingent. Actually, I mean, tying it more closely to being an event, we'll come to see that what is subtracted is the event itself, I think.
The generic.
The generic.
The generic.
Out of the singular. Right.
Yeah, so to give a concrete example, this is the one he gives in St. Paul, where you've got on the one hand the Jews, and on the other hand the Greeks in the Pauline situation in the first century, right? But what he tries to point out is he believes that Paul has got a theory according to which these are two figures of the very same mastery. They're completely caught up in the same problem. The Jews define themselves as not Greek, the Greeks define themselves as not Jews, and so forth. But there's a generic category that's circulating and needs a name. And the one that Paul gives them is Christian, right? And so he gives this name to the generic category, and that category, if you will, it's everywhere in the situation. It roams like the void. It's the void of the situation, and it's what allows the consistency of the situation to be consistent, but nobody's recognizing it as such. And once he gives a name to it, it overturns the situation and is a revolution. So, and that's the generic. Again, you can think of generic in terms of the difference between species and genera, right? The genus versus the species. You've got one genus to however many species. If all you could experience was this, you would never recognize the genus as such, the generic, because it appears everywhere. If all the world were blue, you wouldn't know color blue, right? So the generic is what actually allows all of this to appear as such, but it goes unrecognized until it gets named.
And of course.
And what reveals it is the event.
Right, and just jumping ahead, right? This is our situation.
Right.
In the most literal sense.
Yeah, this is our situation. This is what's beneath it that allows its consistency, but it
right.
goes unrecognized.
But also the very naming of that consistency is itself a decision.
Yes.
Right.
Because it's inexperienceable. It cannot be experienced.
Right.
It has to be decided.
Right, because this is our decision. Just tying this back, right, we'll also see this form later when we begin talking about Hegel. This bad infinity of endless circulation, of defining itself as not other. So that's a little bit jumping ahead, but we'll definitely.
I just wanted to ask this question, and we can decide to move past it if you want. I get what I think you're saying about what it means to have this bad definition of subtractive politics. But could you speak a little bit to the differences that, if any differences are being made in this particular meditation, about the difference of subtraction between Heidegger and Badiou? In
this case, Heidegger is not subtractive
Heidegger
at all.
would be, I mean, strictly speaking, in French phenomenology, they would just say Heidegger is reductive. In the Husserlian sense, in most phenomenology, you undertake a reduction where you try to abstract yourself from natural relations to get it a more essential level. And that's what Heidegger's trying to do, but he says the only way you can do that is through the poem. But that's a reductive, whereas mathematical says, no, there's something that's everywhere in the situation, rather than being having withdrawn to another place. Being is all over the place here, we just can't experience it as such. So it's got to be wagered axiomatically, and then we'll see if it turns out to have been true or not.
Right.
Okay.
So, and of course, right, it also has to deal a little bit with direction. Sorry, since now I'm sure let's use the board. I feel peer pressured into using the board. So for Okay, what we have is we have the DOS line, and it's trying to find being, right? But for Badiou, what we have is we have being. Actually, I'm trying to find a good way to visualize this. Actually, let's go like this.
Yeah, there's a sense in which you can't do this until after the logics of worlds, right?
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know if this would be mutual implication. So what you have, I don't know if this makes sense, but I'll try and make some sense of it. For Heidegger, what you have is the Da sign, and what you're trying to do is uncover being. You're trying to get to this return to being, right, that's been lost, that's been